In a world where most people watch movies and then forget about them, these brave heroes join forces to watch them again and then talk about them. Join them in their epic journey as they go back in time, a decade and beyond, to revisit and break down films from a vast array of genres. Do these movies hold up over time? Are they classics? Find out on Retro Movie Roundtable. Starring your hosts, Bryan Frye, Chad Robinson, Dustin Melbardis, Lizzie Haynes, and Russell Guest. Coming now to headphones in your ears.
Welcome, all you lords, ladies, and knights of the Retro Movie Roundtable, where we watch movies and then talk about them. I'm your host, Dustin Melbardis, and joining me today is my good friend and co-host, Chad Robinson. Chad, how you doing?
You know what, Dustin? I am feeling a little sleepy tonight. I have my energy drink here. I'm having trouble staying awake, so I'm really hoping we have a movie that has nothing to do with that certain topic.
I've got my big mug full of coffee here, because I was feeling a little sluggish, and I
Yeah.
wanted to make sure I stayed alert and stayed awake. I don't want to fall asleep. Chad, it's that season. What's the spooky atmosphere around your house right now that Halloween is quickly approaching?
Oh, good Lord. I torment my neighbors. I have I have projections of clowns. I've got all these clowns. There's one that my wife particularly hates. It's holding a small child. It's probably way too far over the line. It shakes the small child at people. I have one that I hide in the shower and scare my wife because I clearly don't want to still be married to her. Yes, I love her very much. She's the best. It's I've got everything. I'll have music for the kiddos whenever they show up. It's just one of those things. I want my house to be the house that kids are brave enough to go up to, get their candy, and feel great about. Like I did it. But the kids that back off that first year, they'll be back. They'll try again another year.
So now that it's Halloween time, what have you changed about your house?
You know what? I changed the light bulbs. They are now orange.
Oh, wonderful. Yes. 100% effort when it comes to the atmosphere. For me, I live in a neighborhood. I don't go to Halloween parties as much anymore. I put a giant bowl of candy out. We see if the honor system works. And generally, there's a lot of places here in the States where, there's just not really trick or treating that happens anymore. But this neighborhood I've been in for about 6 years, a lot of people come through. I am not waiting at the door to scare them. I just want a
Ooh.
little extra sugar, a little extra work for those dentists out there. Well, we aren't alone. It is not just Chad and I. We've got ourselves a guest coming to you for his first time from the United Kingdom, currently in his film shed, lovingly nicknamed Sheddy Mercury. It is Dan Cook. Say hi, Dan.
Hi there, how are you? You all right?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. And you've got a lovely film shed. How many movies are in there?
Just over 3,000 at the moment, but it's a number that keeps rising with every week.
Listeners,
yes.
you cannot see his film shed, but it looks as if there should be Belle from Beauty and the Beast swinging around on those giant ladders. His walls are completely filled.
Yeah, that's the dream. That's the dream. I'm very grateful for you for asking me to be on the show, so thank you very much.
We're glad you can join. And I'm going to ask something else of you right now, which is just a little warm-up question. See, Chad's got himself an energy drink. I've got myself my coffee. But let's say you needed to hand someone a movie to keep them awake.
Mm-hmm.
Dan, what would you be giving?
I'd probably have to go for my favourite film, which is Jaws. I think the adrenaline that runs through the course of that film just gets bigger and bigger to the point where I can't imagine anyone falling asleep to watching Jaws.
Oh, that is the gift that keeps on giving. My
Yes.
daughter she's now 7, and as a joke during dinner, I turned on Jaws briefly. There was no shark.
Mm-hmm.
It was just the discussion of a shark in the ocean. And it was shut off within 5 minutes, so parents, please don't email me. But my daughter has a now recurring nightmare of Jaws. So even if you're watching the movie, it's going to keep you up later.
Oh, definitely.
You're not going to fall asleep. That shark is going to come get you in your dreams.
It's funny. I've seen the film at least 300 times now.
Wow.
I wrote a lot of my my A level, which we have here in Britain, on Jaws. I've got an entire shelf dedicated to the movie just up here with loads of memorabilia. I've got the video, DVD, Blu-ray, a board game, um, just loads and loads of stuff up there. A Total Film magazine from 1976, which is talking about the film here in the UK. And there are still bits in that film which still give me the creeps. Particularly the moment. Sorry, I know this is talking about another film, but the moment where the dock has broken off after catching the Sunday roast, and it slowly rotates back. And I've always found that moment incredibly freaky.
He's gonna need a bigger shed.
Oh, you know what? The amount of people that have said that to me. That's yes. This is either known as Sheddy Mercury or Cookbusters in honor of Blockbuster, because I'm always lending my films out here. So, yeah, it's pretty much my life. Apart from my kids, obviously, and my wife
Wow.
is talking about films.
I don't think I have a single movie that can come close to 300 watches. I think The Matrix is up there, Fifth Element is up there, but I think I
Hmm.
top out at like 30 watches of something. Nice comfort movie, Jaws.
Yes, yes,
Yes.
it is my comfort movie. I have plenty of them, but Jaws is definitely the number one film. So,
Chad, what's the movie that you would hand someone if you had to keep them awake?
I kind of feel like Die Hard is the
oh
right.
yes,
It's got the right amount of gunfire. It's gonna prohibit sleep, and it's very entertaining. So that would be my go-to.
Not a bad choice. Not a bad choice, especially if you don't know how it goes. Because I think Die Hard is one of those that is so easily rewatchable
Mhm.
that you don't want to miss any of it that you have come accustomed to. But if it is someone's first time, it's like, oh, I'm riveted. You know, I paid for the whole seat, but I'm only using the edge. Uh, for me, and this is a little out of the ordinary, a little crazy for me. I landed on a Triple R, the Bollywood sensation
Mhm.
from 2022. Uh, Sometime in the last 7 or 8 months, I saw a clip of Triple R at 1 o'clock a.m. on my timeline, scrolling on my phone,
Mhm.
and I ended up watching the whole thing. Had a rough day at work the next day,
Yeah,
and I would definitely do it again. It was something that I made a mistake. I turned the movie on and I could not go to sleep. So I've got the real world application of that.
that's a really good choice. I'd also probably add, if we're talking about Asian cinema, I'd also add the Gareth Evans film, The Raid, the Indonesian film. It takes place in a an apartment block, which is it's
Oh,
pretty much a 100-minute long fight scene.
Nice.
yes. The
Yes.
Raid made my top 10 films of 2011 list.
Mine did too.
Yes.
It did for me as well.
Yes. And right, and that's one of those movies where you don't got to worry about the plot. You just have to, yeah, and it's not going to let you stop paying attention. There's just so much
Exactly.
action. I love
Yeah.
it. Well, Dan, what's the last movie that you saw? It could be in theaters, it just could be at home.
Well, I haven't been to the theatres in about 2.5 years. I haven't
Hmm.
been. I miss it immensely, but I haven't been for such a long time. The last film that I watched was actually the film that we're talking about today. I watched it, rewatched it last night as a refresher. Before that, it was actually the Da Vinci Code, the Von Howard film.
Okay.
I
Um,
like it.
you like the Da Vinci Code?
I like the book and I like the movie, and I
Okay.
know that not everyone fits in that camp, but I like it.
Yeah, I've got to be honest. I'm not a fan of it. But last month I watched some absolutely fantastic films. I watched Cinema Paradiso for the first time. I've been watching a load of
Oh,
Akira,
fantastic film.
yeah, a lot of Akira Kurosawa movies, which I've never seen before. I also started to try and catch up with the Friedkin films that I've not seen yet in honor of his,
Hmm.
his recent passing. So I watched
R.I.P.
Cruising and To Live and Die in LA. So last month was a really good month for me in terms of new watching. I just happened to end it on a film which I'm not particularly keen on, which is The Da Vinci Code.
Oh,
But
you were
yeah,
setting me up for failure here because you're mentioning all these cinema greats. And what I just watched was Slaughterhouse. That is sloth
oh,
like the creature, and it is a killer sloth in a sorority house. And you know what? If you like cheesy horror,
I do.
if you can tolerate B-level movies, you're gonna have a good time. Like this is kind of a Zombievers PG-13 version of Zombievers. Happy Death Day is another one that kind of reminded me of this film. I had a great time. Killer Sloth in a Sorority House. I recommend it.
Have you
Slaughterhouse?
Slaughterhouse, yes. And that is actually used as a line in the movie. It is groan-inducing fantastic.
It is on my to watch list in October for Halloween. Definitely.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
What's the rating on that?
PG-13.
Oh,
Oh,
almost.
that's depressed. That's sad. That's
You know
sad.
what? It's interesting though. I'm like, this is a movie I can show my daughter. There's not too there. I couldn't remember any real bad language or anything like that. So this is kind of gateway horror for some people, and we need that.
Oh, definitely.
I was concerned because I knew nothing other than Killer Sloth. I was like, oh, is this just going to be a TNA film in a sorority house? Because almost every film set in a sorority house has that. Nope, completely surprised me. They did not go that direction at all. They are more the Happy Death Day type sorority sisters. So they're very catty and stereotypical, but that's you want to see those people get slashed up by a raging sloth.
In one of those truth is stranger than fiction, I think I'd rather view and I think I'd rather take in the experience of fraternities and sororities through film rather than through interaction of
Yes.
people on actual U.S. college campuses. There's more stories that come out in the news about another atrocity that happens due to these things. Last movie I saw, and I got to give you guys my train of thought here. So I watched the original Super Mario Bros. Movie from 1993.
Oh no! Oh no!
I'd seen it before, Hoskins and Leguizamo,
Yes.
and I have to explain my train of thought here. So I watched a little bit of an interview with Oliver Reed because someone had mentioned that I am quiet at work. And it reminded me of how Oliver Reed plays villains or heavies, to use his language.
Yeah.
And then I remembered an interview with Bob Hoskins where he had to be told that he was playing a video game adaptation movie because he didn't know what Super Mario Bros. Was. And his child showed him the game and said, "Look, that's you with the little sprite bouncing around." And he said, he looks at it, he's flabbergasted. And it's a classic interview moment. He goes, "I used to play King Lear." So like that clip made me laugh, so I had to put the movie on. I don't recommend it. I'm sure that the one that came out this year is heads and shoulders above it, but I haven't seen it yet. Why? Because it's a new movie. Maybe I'll see it in 2033.
It's charming. My daughter loves it.
I really enjoyed it. I'm a big fan of the Mario games, and
Oh, cool.
the more you know about the games and its history, the more you'll get out of the new movie. Unlike the 1993 film, which is it looked like they'd never seen they played a Mario game in their lives.
That's correct.
So, yeah.
And that was correct. Well, love talking about these other movies, but we've got one that is the point of this show tonight. Chad, what are we covering tonight?
We are thankfully finally covering Nightmare on Elm Street from 1984, best year in cinema, by the way, and also my birth year.
And that is starring John Saxon, Ronee Blakley, Heather Langenkamp, Amanda Wyss, Nick Corey, Johnny Depp, and Robert Englund. Budget of $1.1 million, and it grossed $25.5 million that year. Placed 40th in the box office, just behind The Muppets Take Manhattan, and just ahead of The Woman in Red. The number one movie that year was Beverly Hills Cop. Hey, you got to check out our episode on Retro Movie Roundtable number 162, where we cover that movie as well. IMDb rating is 7.4. The critics of Rotten Tomato give it a 95%. That's high. The audience score gives it an 84%. That's pretty high as well. Nominated for a couple of awards from the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror. It was nominated for Best Horror Film and Best Performance by a Young Actor. That would be Shu Garcia or Zhu Garcia, JSU. You figure it out. And it is given an AFI distinction, AFI's 100 Years of 100 Heroes and Villains. That is at number 40, Freddy Krueger, the villain. So we'll start with our guest, Dan, with this movie. Now, it may not be up there with the 300 views of Jaws, but what is your background with A Nightmare on Elm Street?
Well, in my 100 favorite films of all time, it's at number 13. I think it's a great film, and I hadn't seen it in quite a while, and I was worried watching it before I watched it again last night. I was really worried, thinking, is it going to be as good as I remember it being? Because I didn't see it until I was in my late teens, because my mum and dad owned the video cassette of A Nightmare on Elm Street when I was a kid, and I just remember the image of Freddy on the front of it completely freaking me out. So it took me a long time to actually pluck up the courage to watch A Nightmare on Elm Street. And when I watched it, I of course loved it. But I was really worried that I would think, some of this hasn't aged particularly well. Some of the performances aren't particularly great. Am I going to love it as much? And then I finished the film last night. I thought, yeah, I still absolutely love A Nightmare on Elm Street. I think it's one of the most brilliantly economic horror films made by Wes Craven, and I think it's brilliant.
And that's one of those fears I get too, especially if it's a movie that I'm bringing to the table is, am I going to view it differently this
Mm-hmm.
time? Am I going to have a keener eye for the things that maybe I don't want to see or have avoided paying attention to because I had already put it away as, oh, this is a favorite of mine? I guess one more additional question is not really about how it holds up, but because you are covering the movie for a show, did you find that you had different expectations?
I didn't really have expectations except for those that I'd already put into my head because,
Right.
as I said, I thought because I review everything I watch now, and I watch everything with such a critical eye. I was worried that I wouldn't be able to get past that first love that I had of the film when I watched it. As I say, when I was 18, 19 or so. So I didn't really have any expectations because I knew that I loved the film, and there were things that I thought the film does have problems, and I was worried that maybe those problems would overtake the love that I have for the film. So no, I think it's hard to say really. I go into everything with an open mind, whether I've seen it or not, because sometimes I can see a film that I've absolutely loved in the past, rewatched it, and I thought, maybe it's not as good as I remember it being. Conversely, I've seen films that I've not really enjoyed in the cinema, rewatched them, and I thought, oh, okay, no, it's absolutely terrific. It just requires more than one watch. Nightmare on Elm Street is pretty much one of those films where I've thought, now this is a pretty terrific horror film.
I've only had that issue with if there's an extremely impactful movie for the first time you see it, and even if it is rewatchable, it's something where if you already know, does the magic go away?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say 2 years ago, maybe it was even last year, the magic and the lesson of the movie 12 Angry Men was something I had known for decades. And it caused it to fall on my year end ranking of the movie, and I was appropriately lambasted by my other hosts saying, "How do you not rank this movie so high?" I'm like, "Because I already know it. Like the lesson of it was something I had. Well, I don't need to relitigate it." Chad, what about
Mm,
your expectations or background for A Nightmare on Elm Street?
you've just brought up an anger that I haven't really. I had just
I was
gotten
going to
over
say
it.
I'm not
It's
getting involved.
Angry Men.
I love 12 Angry Men. So
I do
Oh, me
too.
too.
It was new to me, and it's like top 10 movie of all time. But yeah, night. Strangely, I am with Dan here. I did not get to this movie until very, very late. I was in my late teens. Maybe I think it was actually my first year of college. I, my parents. I've talked about this before. My parents were strict. Wasn't allowed to see R-rated movies. So this was a big deal. And I said, okay, I'm going to start knocking out these horror franchises that I should get to. And Nightmare on Elm Street was at the top of the list. So I saw it and I immediately bought. It's funny because eBay didn't regulate as well. I bought the 7 movie set from eBay, but it wound up being like burned copies from Hong Kong.
Mm,
So they
the good stuff.
Yeah, yeah, there were some problems on some of the discs, but I did immediately watch the rest of the franchise. I was just enamored by it. I mean, there's nothing like Freddy Krueger. There's no terror in horror more than, hey, everybody's got to sleep. This is a guy, there's no escaping him. He is going to come after you in your dreams. And to me, I've done 1,300 unique horror films. This is my favorite.
Hmm.
I
Ooh,
will I will say Scream is inherently the better movie. Scream is a perfect movie. This is my favorite.
oh, that's great to hear because you never know when our guest brings a movie to the table exactly what it is, what our backgrounds are. Now, I had seen this as a child,
Oh,
but actually, the very first Wes Craven movie in this franchise I ever saw was Wes Craven's New Nightmare,
that's an excellent one, but
and
without
I liked
context.
it a
Yeah.
lot. I've actually seen that one more. However, I this was one of those, and I think a lot of our listeners will probably have a similar experience where it came on TV and you didn't see it fully. So this past watch through was the first start to finish watch through I think I'd ever had. I may have had some others that were nearly full, but it was like on during a Halloween party, or it was on in the dorm room, and it was one of those things. Oh, I know it. So this is the first time that I am approaching it critically, and I'm glad that I did. It's not as if I was looking for something or hunting for anything to pick apart. It was just, oh, I feel like I know this movie, but do I? And I don't think I truly did. I have gone on record on the show to say that Freddy Krueger is my favorite horror movie killer slash monster because of the things that you had said, which is he comes at you in your dreams. He's not just a stoic stalker. There is a magic to him. There is an unassailability to him. And in this movie alone, we see, oh, actually, he's not all powerful, but the things that we get from him. I'm not going to do, Chad, I'm not going to do what we did with Leprechaun, which is list out the powers. But the idea is he's got some things he can do and some things that he may not be able to do, and that creates this, I'm not going to say mystery, but an uncertainty as to precisely what he is. And I think maybe we'll address that, especially since he found his way onto the AFI Top 100 Villains list. We'll talk about Freddy in detail a little later, but that will come after this break. We got to take a little break. We're going to share a little info about our friends, and when we come back, Chad is going to give a plot summary, and that means if you have not seen A Nightmare on Elm Street, you better go watch it. But make sure that you make yourself some hot coffee, no warm milk. Don't fall asleep.
Welcome to the All 80s Movies Podcast.
I'm Bill.
And I'm Jason. And this is the podcast where we talk about the blockbusters, the flops, and everything in between from one of the freshest decades for movies, the 1980s. So whether you're a brain, a jock, a valley girl, or a Jedi, we've got some 80s classics for you.
Do these movies stand the test of time? Are we discovering something new? Is there an 80s movie we're finally watching for the first time?
Join us each week as we dive into the cinematic nostalgia that inspired and influenced a generation. From the hits to the cult classics, we'll discuss our earliest memories, favorite scenes, fun facts, and our not-so-favorite movie moments too.
It's the All 80s Movies Podcast, now available on all major streaming platforms. Please subscribe and happy listening.
And we are back. It's time for Chad to provide us a plot summary of A Nightmare on Elm Street. Take it away.
Teenager Tina Gray wakes up from a terrifying nightmare in which a disfigured man with a glove filled with knives attacks her in a boiler room. She discovers that her nightgown has 4 mysterious slashes. The next morning, she talks to best friend Nancy Thompson and her boyfriend Glenn Lance, who had similar dreams. They all stay over at Tina's house to help her sleep, but then Tina is mysteriously gutted and her boyfriend is blamed. Nancy begins having hyper-realistic dreams and waking up with scars and burns from a mysterious assailant. Tina's boyfriend Rod is killed in his jail cell by an apparent hanging. Nancy then discovers the disfigured man is named Fred Krueger after pulling a hat from her dream into the real world. Nancy's mom reveals that Fred was a child murderer, and the parents of Elm Street took justice into their own hands and burned him to death. Nancy's boyfriend Glenn is then killed in his sleep, and Nancy is determined to fight Freddy in his world. She asks her police officer father to wake her up in 20 minutes, but of course he doesn't show up or take her seriously. Nancy believes she pulls Freddy into the real world and refuses to acknowledge his powers anymore, causing Freddy to disappear. Nancy walks out to find her friends and her mom, who had been killed, waiting for her, and she gets in Glenn's car. The car appears possessed and drives off as the top closes and reveals it's the same color as Freddy's sweater. Freddy then drags Mom through the door as little girls jump rope singing, 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you.
Great recap. Or is it the color of Freddy's sweater, or is it the color of the dreaded hall monitor's sweater?
Yes.
Well, I guess we can say we don't know for sure, ending the movie with a bit of uncertainty as to what is real, what has happened, what has lasted. I'm going to start our discussion phase with just a little request, which is that we try our hardest to focus on this movie and this movie alone, not the rest of the film franchise. But I am a fair and patient arbiter, so bring in whatever examples you like, as long as you bring it back home. And we are discussing and rating this movie only tonight. Ordinarily, I wouldn't bring up the atmosphere until later in the discussion, but I'd like to start with that, Dan, is
Hmm.
that this is a maybe unlike anything else, at least at the time, and it's probably the best example of the dream attacker. Or we have something that is, like I said before, a little bit magical. What is it about the atmosphere of this movie that puts it so high on your list?
Well, I think I'm a big fan of the slasher genre in general. Some of my favorite films, such as Halloween, Black Christmas from 1974, in particular, is my absolute favorite slasher movie. And the thing is with those is that they're pretty low on actual kills, but due to the music and the cinematography, the lighting, and the steady direction, there's a sense of eeriness to them that the later slasher, well, the slasher films that came after Halloween, Friday the 13th and Prom Night and My Bloody Valentine, as much as I do enjoy those films, they didn't really have much in the way of subtlety. Wes Craven brought that subtlety back by blending the slashers with this sense of supernatural intangibility. And that's why I think, in answer to your question earlier, why Freddy has become so popular and why he's left such a mark on the horror genre is because he's unlike any other of the major slasher villains of the 70s and 80s. He's not mute. He's got one hell of a personality. He talks. He'll give you a one-liner before he'll gut you.
He likes to play with his victims. I almost said play with your food.
Yes.
Exactly, like a predator. And I think that atmosphere that conjured through the cinematography, and particularly through Charles Bernstein's very odd music, which alternates between soothing lullaby and atonal grinding and crunching of synthesizers, it all helps to create this very odd atmosphere, which is not unlike that of being in a dream or nightmare.
Yeah, Wes Craven would agree with you, Dustin, as far as just talking about this movie. Wes Craven didn't want any more movies. He hates the hook of this movie. But Bob Shaye, who is a miracle man, Bob Shaye went, this movie almost collapsed so many different times. And Bob Shaye is putting stuff on credit cards. He is begged, borrowing, and stealing just to be able to get this up and running. 2 weeks before they were getting ready to shoot, it was canceled. Everyone was told to go home. Bob Shaye's like, just give me a day. Let me work on this. Even at the end, they couldn't get the negatives released. The lab hadn't been paid, so Bob Shaye has to put that on his credit card. This could have absolutely done in New Line Cinema. New Line Cinema is now known as the house that Freddy built. So yeah, it's just one of these movies where Wes is focusing on, he has a suburban horror. We have that in Scream. We have that in People Under the Stairs. We have that on Last House of the Left. It's what Wes does so well, is just these suburban horror. And what could be more terrifying here? We have a mystery. Okay, we've got this weird demon thing. What is happening? And the parents they give these knowing glances of, okay, this burned guy with a sweater and a hat is chasing you. No, this can't be. And I like that little bit of mystery in here too. And you get the mom uttering the line, he can't get you. Mommy killed him.
Yeah.
That is such an extreme line. And so now it transforms into, this is his motive. This is why Freddy did it. Is he is hunting down children whose parent, the sins of the father, is hunting them down. And so we get that story, and it just transforms from a slasher to a revenge film. And I'm with Dan. I love my slashers. They're my favorite as well. This is on another level as far as slashers go, because during the time we are casting stuntmen. This is what you did for your villain. You went out for a slasher film. You went and got a stuntman. You got the tallest guy, Kane Hodder, who plays Jason in later films. He interviewed for this. He auditioned. He talked to Wes Craven because they were talking about getting this giant dude. the criticism with Robert Englund was he looked like a geek and he was short. But you know what? He injected his personality into this. So it was, we want a heroine. We don't want someone that's falling in the woods, Friday the 13th. We want a villain that talks and scares you with words rather than just, I mean, the claws are terrifying enough. But this isn't My Bloody Valentine where he's got a gas mask and an axe and that's all you know.
Yeah, I think that's the thing with Freddy. I think with Jason and Michael and Leatherface and Harry Warden from My Bloody Valentine, because they don't say anything or they don't emote anything. There's almost this sense of a locomotive of death. It's going to come towards you without, almost like the shark in Jaws,
unfeeling in a way.
Yes,
Yes.
there's this sense of almost unknowing, unstoppable chaos that's coming towards you. But with Freddy, because he speaks, because he references these other characters in the film, because he directly talks to these characters as if he knows them, there's that sense of like personal revenge against them, that he knows what he's doing is wrong and he's getting immense pleasure out of it. And there is something so sadistic about Freddy Krueger, which is something that was lost in the later films. He became much more of a comedic character, but in the first film, he was very much like the archetypal boogeyman. Bogeyman. He would be almost like a villain in a Grimm's fairy tale or something. He knows what he's doing is wrong, and he's absolutely loving it while he's doing it.
Oh, he relishes all of that. Playing with your food is probably the best term that you mentioned, Dustin. I will mention this. So later films, and I know you want to keep it to this film, but I think it's relevant, is later films make it clear that there was child molestation. But
Yes.
during this film, there was a big case. I can't remember the name of the case that came out in the 80s. There was a lot of child sexual assault. And so it was dialed back. McMartin was the scandal. It was dialed back for this movie. They kind of sidestep it and they just talk about him being a child murderer. And the remake of this one, they delve into there's molestation as well.
Yeah.
I'll kick this to you, Dustin, because you just said this is the first time you've watched this. Did you understand? Did you pick up, okay, maybe there's something else going on? Or do you kind of like the option of maybe the parents were wrong? Like maybe they burned the wrong dude?
So there's a couple things, and while I will say it's my first start to finish, I had always been I like to, like a sponge, soak up when it comes to movie theories or the rights and wrongs, especially with remakes. And I remember there being a little bit of a fervor with, if this is going to be reimagined, are they going to stick with child murderer or go with child molester? And I know that that is a squeamish topic for everyone. And I think I've gone on record on the show saying, like, guys, can you give me a crime that isn't just drug trafficking into the United States? And then if we do go that far, where it's like, it's not just child murder, it's child molestation, then we've got, well, are we comfortable with filming it or having it on screen? So what we do have is, since we know Freddy plays with his food in this sense, like, how many times do we have a shot from above of Freddy on top of, I believe the ones that we get the most are on top of Tina or on top of
Nancy.
Nancy. Thank you. I'm about to say Kathy. Or on top of Nancy. And there's wrestling going on. And though we know he's a small guy, but though he is this kind of strange monster that floats in and out of what's real and what's not, I would like to believe that's a weird way of saying it, but it makes sense for me that he's kind of playing around. If he gets tossed off the bed, that he's letting himself be overpowered in this way. He's letting himself play out this sick game at any time in these chases. He wants them to be chases, and I think Wes Craven does a great job of showing you that, like, oh, he likes the chase, because with that hand of his, he could just gut or kill anyone. But if he's going to track you down from behind, grabbing first, if you just kill someone right away, where's the fear? Where's that terror to drink up? And that's what Freddy wants. And then if you put it back into the context of the helplessness, the fear, the terror of, well, if we introduce him that he's also a child molester, then for for a moment, or maybe for too many moments, in the audience's eyes, they're like, ugh, I'm watching this guy who has a fun personality because he's got one at all. But he's actually really terrible because he did this, and we have a body count, 20 kids from long ago. So there's something where I enjoy, or I guess I respect that the choice was, hey, the time right now, it's not good to include the child molestation part. Let's go with child murderer. I still feel as if there is there's a lot to sink your teeth into, and it is what makes this movie special beyond just the sequels by itself. Oh, this guy is bad. You could almost say, I was thinking about how you said it's not just a slasher, it's actually more of a revenge movie. And that's where I'm going. I like it better as a revenge movie.
Mm.
I like it better. You could almost call this a secret on Elm Street instead of a nightmare on Elm Street. And that's when the depth really reveals itself. Go ahead, Dan.
Sorry, I was going to say, going back through Wes Craven's catalogue, the film that really put him on the map was Last House on the Left. And the lead character in that, the lead killer, is called Krug Stilo. And he is just a despicable piece of work. The film was banned here in the UK as a video nasty. And it is a relentlessly nasty film to watch. And Krug Stilo in that film isn't only a murderer, but he is also, a sadist and a rapist. I think if they'd gone that route with Freddy Krueger, for one thing, he wouldn't be, the series would not nearly be as popular as it is. And I think it also would have turned off audiences because it would have made it much more like I don't know if it would be trivializing the notion of child molestation.
Mm-hmm.
But I think by making it just a murderer, it still allows him to sit in that same canon of characters like Jason and Michael and Leatherface. I think it's a very good balancing act that Wes Craven does there, because you could certainly read into the film if you wanted to that there may be a subtext of molestation, and certainly in some of the later films and Freddy vs. Jason, I think that subtext is writ large. But with the first film, Craven is very careful to not play all of his cards. He as you say, it is a mystery. Why is he doing this? There is a chance that he could have been wrongly accused, and I think that puts that element of doubt into the audience's heads until that moment that he guts Tina and she starts flying around the bedroom, and you realise, oh no, this guy is actually bad. It's not just a case of revenge. It is he's getting immense pleasure out of this. As you say, he's like a predator, a cat playing with the mouse.
Well, Chad, I don't know if I answered your question really, but the idea that our response from Marge, from Mother, is that, the lawyers got fat and the judge got famous, but in the end, somebody didn't sign the search warrant and he walked. And is that a little bit as to what you were referencing as to, well, we don't know the why, we don't know the 100% justice was served. And gosh, this has been the year of where we have people taking the law into their own hands on the Retro Movie Roundtable. Is that a little bit as to what you were getting at?
Yeah, exactly. I think leaving it more vague, even with the possibility of, okay, these parents went after someone that we're not sure was guilty initially. Now he comes back as some form of revenge demon. I think that's far easier to root for Freddy. We have this. There's a theme
Good
within
point.
a lot of slashers. There's a common theme of there has to be a sin for people to be killed. Jason is killing horny teenagers. They are committing a sin,
Yeah.
and so they get
Too
killed.
horny.
Here, our first person, she's in bed with her boyfriend, and that's how she dies. She has committed the sin. Nancy is our innocent virgin character, but he's still able to manifest through that sin of the parents. They took the law into their own hand. So that's a common theme with slashers. Now there have been some that have subverted it. My favorite being Cabin in the Woods. They talk about that quite a bit. It's like, you've got a virgin. She's like, well, I'm not a virgin. I'm like, well, we have to bend the rules a little bit here, and they've got to fit the stereotypes. But yeah, that's been a common motif. So yeah, to me, I don't want to say I'm glad there was an awful scandal that involved children,
Right.
But I think for Freddy to become this icon that he did, if that had truly been prominent within the story, we have Krug. Krug isn't getting a franchise
No.
for Last House on the Left.
No.
It just becomes too sadistic. It becomes too hard to stomach. This movie was edited quite a bit and banned by the MPAA. Like, they had to send it constantly back. Wes is still mad about how much blood they had to cut out of it. They dumped, it was like 2,200 gallons of blood for Johnny Depp's death.
Right.
And they had to take out a solid 5-10 seconds of it just streaming in. I guess the MPAA said, Wes, enough.
Oh, come
Enough.
on.
Did it.
Glenn's death is a literal geyser.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Well, it's when you talk about some of the sins, or like the kids are getting targeted for a reason, or is there a stereotype perhaps that the killer's looking for something here? I would say that this movie stands out then, as what we have a general lack of the quote horror movie lead or horror movie teen doing something stupid resulting in their own demise. Like that great Geico commercial out there, like, should we run to
Yes.
the running car? No, let's go hide behind the chainsaw wall. Is that we don't have that very much. In fact, maybe we don't go so far as to say the kids do nothing wrong, but we have the real onus of violence on the monster, on our killer, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Nancy Thompson is one of those great movie heroines. She is someone, she's not making the stupid mistakes. She has a plan.
That's right.
It Follows as another one. Like, even though it may be a bad plan, she's a kid. She's trying her best to come up with a plan to fight this force that she thinks she understands, that she's able to pull into the real world. None of the kids are doing anything particularly wrong. They're just going to sleep. It's the parents that are the acting force against them. Of how many times do you hear, oh, you just need some sleep. You need your rest. I made you a warm glass of milk. Here are pills, whatever else. The parents are the antagonistic force to them. They are the ones that are setting Freddy up for the kill. It's not the teens being promiscuous or anything else. There's Michael Myers isn't breaking into the house because the teens were having sex. This is Freddy is just, he's waiting for them to make the mistake of going to sleep, which you got to do.
You got to do, yeah.
The generational aspect of it, that this was something that happened a while ago, I guess is something that, now that I think about it, happens quite a bit in movie franchises like this, or even not franchises. For instance, Stephen King's It, is that this happened a while ago. This happened again. Chad, what was that movie? The Rise of Leslie Vernon, Behind the
Yes,
Mask.
Behind the Mask.
Behind the Mask.
Yes.
These things come like in cycles in a way, and this one, I really think that if you have watched this before and then you rewatch it in the context of this is a revenge movie instead of the slasher, that depth reveals itself. And I really dig, as I've said on this podcast several times, thinking about this movie as much as I enjoy watching the movie. But with this sort of situation, we have the sets, we have the bedroom sets, we have the school set, or we have the school, I guess we should say. It's a great school. And then we have the boiler rooms, the iconic boiler rooms. Uh, Tell me about how, like, I would say, as a guy who works in like building management, that I probably know more about boiler rooms from from the Nightmare on Elm Street movies more than I know from my own experience. Dan, the spaces that we're in, and I think most of this happens at like in these just maybe 5 or 6 locales. Is this something that you're like, oh man, because it's iconic, the boiler rooms, or because he can kind of appear anywhere, daydreaming becomes dangerous? Is this something that is a lasting impact for you?
Yeah, I love the setting of the boiler room, because every killer has to have their lair,
Yeah.
their place of fun. Norman Bates has got the Bates Motel. Jason has Crystal Lake. Harry Warden has Valentine's Bluffs, I beg your pardon, and Freddy's got his boiler room. You know, it's where he did the killings when he was alive. It's insinuated that that's where he took his kids
Yes.
to kill them. And I love the fact that whenever Freddy wants to interact with one of his victims, that's where he takes them. He said, even though I'm dead, I'm still going to act like I'm alive, and I'm still going to pretend like nothing has happened. I'm still going to have my way with you in the way that I want to. I'm still fully in control of the situation. And I think that's why A Nightmare on Elm Street has transcended the genre so well, because that sense of that disorientation that comes from dreaming, and is particularly in a nightmare, where locations can change completely randomly, people can pop in and out, and things can happen completely inexplicably, like a centipede can come out of someone's mouth, or
Yes.
a body bag can be dragged down a hallway, and a hall monitor can say, "No running in the hallway." You know, I love that, because with so many other slasher movies, it's just a guy running through the woods, running through a house, killing somebody in the same locations over and over again. But because Freddy has that control of the dream world, he can change location on the drop of a hat. But he always chooses to go back to the boiler room because that's his safe place. In the same way that sleep is meant to be our safe place, his safe place is his boiler room.
Yes, and I love the idea. Gosh, you mentioned like the layer. That's so prudent. But then I love the idea that any wake up scene, you can't really be certain that it's a wake up scene, and we do get our what I don't even like the idea of relegating it down or boiling it down, no pun intended, to a jump scare. It's the idea that because we're dealing with these uncertainties of what's dreaming, what's not, truly a concept that everyone in every audience has had.
Yeah,
That's
Absolutely.
special.
it's a universal fear.
Yes. Is am I in the dream or not? What so we have that instance. Chad, do you enjoy or does it add to the movie that there's discussion about dreaming, the dream theory or dream philosophy, whether it comes from Glenn, who talks about the Balinese aspect of dreaming, or whether it comes from the sleep clinic where you've got the doctor, so dreaming is something we don't really understand. How does that add to this experience for you?
Yeah, yeah, that dude was not a believable doctor at all.
That was
So
Roger Rabbit.
yes, he's spitting out words and has no idea what he's talking about. But yeah, this is very interesting because there are cultures that have dream demons and ways to explain children dying in their sleep. And so Wes Craven actually took this from a series of Los Angeles Times articles. There were Southeastern Asian refugees that were coming and they were dying in the throes of these just terrible, terrible nightmares. They came to the U.S. to escape, and 3 men died in really similar instances. And they would say, "I'm going to die. I can't go to sleep." And then people didn't believe them, and they did. They would die they die screaming. And it was just this phenomena. But Buffy the Vampire Slayer did a very, very memorable episode. I can remember watching fairly young of a demon that would sit on children's chests and basically suffocate them. And only the kids could see him, the adults couldn't. So other cultures have tried to explain these phenomena where otherwise healthy people, young people, are dying in their sleep. So Wes has capitalized. It's not a big US fear, but he's taking other cultures, which is sometimes the best thing you can do, something that's a little foreign to us. Say, here's another culture that's trying to explain this. I'm going to make this into a true monster here. And yeah, the sudden unexpected death syndrome, which is it's a real thing. And so we have Freddy Krueger as the manifestation of that.
Yeah, and we can either have it as the dream monster or the unseeable threat results in you not waking up. Or we could have it shown to us in a fantastic way using 1984 visual effects, special effects. I don't frequently say we have to talk about that when it comes to movies, but I feel like this movie really surprised me when I looked at the title year. I'm like, ooh, this is looking really good.
Oh, Jim Doyle is a
Yeah, he's a
genius.
genius. He's an absolute genius.
I want to hear about this genius more from you fans.
Well, when he was being interviewed in the late 80s. Brian Yuzna, who directed Society, he came up with this idea of plastic reality. And it was something that was only really made capable in the 80s with the creation of polymethylcellulose, where you could imagine something and you could create it. And you could create a living puppet or a maquette or whatever you like, an animatronic, and you could do it. So, for example, like John Carpenter's The Thing, where you have these fantastical animals, which, you know, which is still extraordinary to look at. But with Brian Yuzna, he said that it's not gore, it's surrealism. Like for the moment where Nancy answers the phone, and Freddie's mouth appears and turns into a tongue. And
Yeah,
says, I'm your boyfriend.
I'm
now,
your
Nancy."
boyfriend.
Great line, one of my favorite lines in the film. And he says,
She kept that prop. Heather.
"Did she?
Yeah, she took it
that's
from
brilliant.
the set. She kept it.
That's brilliant." And he said, "This isn't gore; it's surrealism, in the same way that Buñuel would be surrealism, or David Lynch would be surrealist." The special effects in this film are amazing. I think the ones that work better are the ones which are the more subtle ones like that. I mean, the scene where Tina slashed across the chest and you see the gashes appear in real time and then the blood comes spurting out is, you know, it's amazing special effects. But for example, the bed sheet that goes around Rod's neck and seems to magically tie itself into a noose and drag him through his jail cell to
Right.
create what looks like a hanging. It's such a subtle thing. And because the film was, you know, not the biggest budgeted of films, Wes Craven had to be economical with his horror, and I think it's things like that, whether the use of a revolving room for the vortex of blood coming out with Johnny Depp's death, or the telephone, as I said. Jim Doyle managed to create these very real realizations of metaphors, which really did kind of cement Elm Street's place in the realms of horror as so much more than just a regular slasher movie, but more of a surrealist work of moments of genuine weirdness and eeriness.
I've got something to add on to that, what you said about Rod's hanging, which they do a good enough job after the fact of being like, oh, he was pulled up there. In fact, if you have subtitles on, it even says neck breaks.
Yes, neck breaks.
Because we know that's the thing about hanging is it's not that you're being suffocated, it's that your neck is being broken. But aside from that, a quick aside, I'm a huge fan of Jim Henson and like Muppet Studios and their animatronic work. And I will say, let's take, for example, Audrey 2 from Little Shop of Horrors,
Yes.
where we've got these green tendrils and they look like vines. But if you pay attention just a little bit, you can okay, you can very easily tell these things. It's not so realistic. But there's something about that sheet snaking up Rod's body. And what else do we get? A lovely sound design aspect of just Fred Krueger.
And grunting and enjoying himself as he's doing it.
He's really liking this.
Yeah.
And that is one of the more unsettling things too, is gosh, you really see just how much he likes it. Chad, did you have something else there?
Yeah, Dan alluded to it, but the revolving room is just such a stroke of genius. That's how
Yes.
they did the Tina death, is they built a giant cube that they could rotate, and they had a stationary camera mounted, but it messed with Amanda Wyss so much that Wes would have to constantly point to the ceiling, which was now the floor, and he'd say, "This is up, this is down," and she would just get so disoriented. It doesn't come through in the movie at all. She just does this wonderful job of screaming, but she talks about how disoriented she was because she's crawling on something that she views should be the ceiling, but is suddenly her floor. And just then they use that same room for Johnny Depp's death, and they cut a hole in the ceiling and then just dump the gallons and gallons and gallons of blood, which is wonderful. But even some of the effects for Freddy, like the long arms, it's two guys at the end of the stage, one on one side, one on the other, that just pull the arms out with fishing poles. The bathtub, we'd probably do that CGI now. I'm a big practical effects. Jim Doyle just cut a hole in the bathtub, and he's the one with that Freddy glove in between Heather Langenkamp's legs, and he's sitting in the bathtub in this like little tank beside it. And so he's doing these little takes where he holds his breath, goes under, puts the glove up. And what a great shot that is.
Yeah.
And he's just doing all these things. The wall.
My favorite shot in the film.
Somebody needed to bring that up.
My favorite shot in the entire film. Yeah.
Yeah. It's spandex. They had just discovered spandex, so they did a wall of spandex. And once again, it's Jim Doyle pressing his face against the spandex to get the face and hands. And you'll notice before you start getting that imagery, there's a crucifix on the wall.
Mm.
And Wes Craven has a big Baptist background. His parents were fundamental Baptist. And so they're probably not too happy about his filmography. But there's a lot of that Baptist imagery throughout this film, and Freddy is knocking that crucifix off. And that's when he can appear within the room when the crucifix is off the wall. So there's some of that. If you do your rewatches, you'll see
Yeah.
religious imagery within this film, and that's coming from Wes's Baptist background.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought up the wall. I will say the only effect of the movie that I thought maybe it jarred me a little bit as I was like, ooh, is this not as good as the rest? Is when you mentioned the extending arms, especially because I don't think
Okay.
it's like it's a necessary aspect of Freddy Krueger to be able to show him that he manipulates where he is or what he is or like how I guess it's hard to nail down precisely the physics of him. That's the only one because it does seem as if they're being pulled up, but
Yeah.
I was also distracted because the lighting of that alley
Mm.
and the lighting of the boiler rooms. And I think our film lighting, or our horror film lighting is aces in this movie, especially in that alley scene. But that was the one that I kind of like, that one wasn't great for me. But some of the stuff, like it doesn't need to be, God, I mean, I think Chad, you and I agree about the practicality. Dan, you brought up the the thing, and I
Mm.
think it's if you have to point to a practical effects movie as its champion, that might be the one.
Yeah.
But there's so much in this that is it really adds to, I think, the flavor. It adds to your sort of experience, and that's one too. Is that it's it's that he can be anywhere. He does bust through a wall. That's pretty neat. And then he also gets caught by the traps.
Yes, the Home Alone
Home
traps.
Alone, exactly.
Uh-huh. And so Dan, how do you think this operates with our audiences to see that wait a second, Nancy's being successful?
It's cool in that respect because very rarely would the final girls in slasher movies actually be that productive. They'd usually win through mere chance, or
Yeah.
the killer themselves would end up causing their own downfall, or someone else would do it on their behalf, like Donald Pleasance in Halloween. I've got to be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of Nancy as a character. And I think the ending, once it gets to the Home Alone part, and the room starts exploding and there's fiery footprints, the film's it doesn't lose me, but I think the film starts to become a bit weaker for me because it's in the more intangible ways that Freddy interacts with the characters that he really works for me. When he's brought into the real world and he's getting hit in the chest with a sledgehammer like it's a Laurel and Hardy film, I'm okay. It's become more. It starts to hint towards, for me personally, it starts to hint to what the rest of the series would end up becoming. This more kind of slapsticky, kind of light-hearted, jokey.
Yeah, a cavalcade of errors, or the idea
Yes,
that it's a circus, and I see what you're saying there.
yeah, and particularly the final way in which Freddy is defeated in what's it called, quotation marks, that he just disappears. I mean, I get that it's just meant to be, it's like a bad thought. If you forget about it, it'll go away, or out of sight, out of
Right.
mind kind of thing. I think the film, due to Wes Craven's pressure by Bob Shaye to make a sequel, I think it's clear that I don't think really his heart was in that ending. I think if he'd had full control of the script in the end and the way that the film played out, I don't really think we would have got that Home Alone style ending in the, in its fullest capacity. I think it would have gone maybe back to the dream world, or maybe it would have been a more strange surrealist kind of thing, kind
Mm-hmm.
of like we saw with the end of Wes Craven's New Nightmare. I think it could have gone that way rather than just being this very kind of stereotypical chase through the house ending that a lot of the slasher movies at the time ended with.
See, I'm going to go with this. I feel like this movie can kind of be the same debate as Inception. It's a much later film, but are they dreaming? Are they? To me, Nancy is dreaming all of this. I don't think she ever woke up. I think the house chase, I think the power, all of that, when she steps outside, everything's restored. All of her friends are back. And the only way to me, and it's open for interpretation, everybody has their own interpretation. And I love that about this film. Even though we weren't supposed to get the hook, Wes wanted a happy ending. To me, Nancy lost. Now now in Nightmare 3, they kind of just ignore all that, but Freddy's not done playing with her.
No, not at
Nancy
all.
has become this nuisance to him. He's like, all right, yeah, I've got you for another night or whatever it is. Nancy's still asleep, so she is dreaming these successes.
Yeah.
She's dreaming these victories in a way that a teenager would. I mean, you're going to have these dreams. Okay, I'm going to set these successful traps and it's going to work on this magic dream demon. And then I'll just turn my back and say, I take your power and everything's going to work out for me, because that makes sense as a teenager.
I get that. I think the thing that sells that idea is the line that Ronee Blakley says, where she says, "Do you know what? I'm not going to drink anymore. I just don't like it anymore."
Yes.
It's such a badly written line, but I think purposefully so, because it's what Nancy would imagine in her perfect world.
Yeah.
All of her friends would be alive, the sun would be shining, her hair would look nice, the bars would be off her house, and her mom would have stopped drinking. So maybe you're right in that idea that yes, it is all a dream, forgetting about what happens later on in the franchise where she comes back. If it is just a singly contained film like Wes Craven wanted it to be, I agree with you that yes, Nancy lost the fight.
Yeah, there's so much there with gosh, the way that you just changed my mind about that line. Because, as I've said several times on this show, I think alcoholism is mostly failed in film. It's used as a scapegoat, it's used as a boogeyman of its own.
Mm-hmm.
And the line at the end of this one is, you know what? I'm going to stop drinking.
Because it's that easy. Yeah.
Gosh, and you can really only the discussion is what opens your eyes to it. Like, aha, this isn't really, this isn't the win that we think it is. And I would say that the gag, we could call it a gag, of the soft top convertible coming up and it's the red and green of the sweater, that should have happened 45 minutes ago. That should have been part of a different dream. Ending the movie there, not exactly sure if that's what I want. But I don't think we should get into the change one thing just yet. But I will say we did kind of touch on how we feel when a movie's worth of struggles results in, it's not the uncertainty I'm talking about, but really results in our character's loss or disaster. It doesn't sound like it really takes away from it for you guys. Chad, it seems as if it almost like, oh, we know that's not what Wes Craven wants. But do you feel like that is because it's what you're left with? I think I've maybe brought up before the idea, the social psychology thing of peak end theory, where there's the peak of the movie and then there's the end of the movie. And sometimes the end is given more weight than the peak. How do you feel about how this movie ends with hey, did we actually learn anything or succeed at all?
Yeah, I tend to agree with Dan. And as I said, Scream is the perfect movie. It is perfect from beginning to end. Nightmare is not perfect, and it does suffer a weak third act. It does, but it's still my favorite, and I think I like it because I view it within this framework of our heroine lost. Mm-hmm. She did her best. She did everything she could, and Freddy, just like Thanos, is inevitable. Sleep is inevitable, and he is not done. And there's something just ultimately sinister to me of a villain saying, it doesn't matter what you do. People don't like the inevitable. People don't like the inescapable. They want some kind of solution to this. I don't. I want this type of dream demon to never stop. And just being able to say, and they establish this later on, of his power comes from people remembering him. Just being able to suddenly turn your back to somebody who's been trying to kill you for an hour and say,
Right.
you know what, I take your power, and that being good. No, that's unsatisfying to me. I love the fact that that backfired.
If we knew that sequels were planned, and we know that sequels happened, do you think that the first movie's resolution should have included the sleep study, the Balinese dream theories, the like other cultural stuff like you were talking about, or even the reveal of we as a community did this to this guy? Do you feel as if those are all three pretty big cannonballs of ammunition to help? I think when there's a story with you have your protagonist and you have your villain, that if there's a solution found and the villain adapts, another solution found, then the villain adapts. I have to presume that that's what a lot of the movie franchise goes, but I almost feel as if there's too much ammunition in this first movie. Dan, how did you feel about like where exactly are we going to go with this, especially since it does end with, well, if I just don't believe in you, I'm going to be safe?
Yeah, it's a pretty unconvincing ending to me, and I think that is in due some parts to Heather Langenkamp's acting. I'll get onto that in a bit. It's weird that you said that though, about the the fact that the heroine doesn't win in the end, because when I think about some of my favorite films of all time, whether it be David Fincher's Seven, Robin Hardy's The Wicker Man, or the film which I think is vastly underrated, Halloween 3: Season of the Witch,
Agreed.
all of those films, the hero doesn't win, and I think that makes it very interesting, because it makes, as a good horror film should, it should make you feel not safe once the lights are turned back on, and you
Good
close the
point.
curtains and go to bed. I love the fact that Wes Craven says, well, I mean, maybe due to the behest of Bob Shaye, but the fact that you can't defeat evil that easily. Evil will always find a way back. Good doesn't always triumph. It's not, going back to what you said about Wes Craven's upbringing. The good doesn't always triumph in the end. Evil will find its way back, and Freddy Krueger is just that embodiment of the sins of the fathers coming back to haunt the children. You can't just eradicate evil that easy.
Sometimes I like to think of it as it's not even our protagonist or our heroine or our hero's job to eliminate evil. It's just to get away.
Mm.
Mhm.
If it's the house, it's the ranch, it's the building, it's the school. Get away,
Yep.
because the issue's over there. So
Yeah.
if we just leave, we half of us didn't make it, but at least we're kind of safer. And that's when you can toy with the idea of like, did you bring something with you? Or is there some reason you have to go back over there? Because if we go back over there, that's where the scary thing is. I love thinking of it in terms of Grover's near and far. But the idea is with you can't get away from sleep. And gosh, don't we come back to it as that's why this is so scary. I to add to your list, Dan, I wanted to say that's why I love The Ring.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is you know what you maybe you thought we were okay, but nah, we're not really. And that's just something about this. I wanted to bring up maybe one or two other topics, but I want to see whatever grasps your interest, guys. It would either be our cast of actors playing teenagers, or it would be our music. And one of those things must be at least near top of mind for you guys. So, what is it about either of those two things that stands out for you here?
I think I'll talk about the score and the sound, because that's what struck me the most when I revisited this film, is how good the sound is throughout this movie.
Mhm.
When we go to the boiler room, it's funny because they had problems finding a dirty boiler room. They had to go to a jail because every boiler room they were going to was pristine. So they go to this jail.
Inspected and operating the way it should.
Right. This jail was actually shut down. The boiler room was several years later for asbestos. So Wes Craven's like, we were breathing in all this asbestos while we were filming. But the hisses and all the subtle notes that Charlie Bernstein is bringing in, we have Heather Langenkamp's boyfriend. He writes that creepy little rhyme that is so memorable. And then we have Bob Shaye's 14-year-old daughter. She's one of the singers for the 1, 2. And Dan mentioned it. It's almost like a nursery rhyme throughout this. And so that's just another thing you think of, especially those with kids. We're singing to our children. And okay, are we singing to our children in a manner that is going to send them into a nightmare? And it just creates this surreal atmosphere. Scream does it as well. There's this grind and there's grunge to it in that main track that
Yeah.
it's something. I don't know how Wes does it with $1 million budget, but he finds the right people to make the sound in his movies just amplify what's going on so much, even down to the crunches of the feet. Everything is just so articulated, and I love it.
And with the sound track, there were things in this movie that I thought, if I didn't hold it in reverence, would I dislike it? We have Nancy running away in the boiler room. The time that right before she burns her hand or her arm to wake herself up, there's like a poppy synth track
Yes.
that plays
Yeah.
that I love.
Yeah.
That I love. And you're thinking, like, wait a second, this should be, if this were modern, this would be heavy brass hits and dark bass and cello tones, and it would be more ominous. But here we have just sort of a, it's almost as if it kind of reflects the times, but it's not bad. And because it's not bad, it's good. And I like that. There's another one right when she's drowning in the tub. They're almost drowning. That legitimately sounds like they just ripped off Devo. That they've got it playing. And if you hadn't thought it before, next time you watch it, dear
Thanks.
listeners,
Yeah. Thanks.
that's what it is. It's basically what it is. But the only thing I would say I don't care for, I can't say I don't care for it, but the nursery rhyme itself. Because what it does, what it messed with me this watch was, I was like, oh, wait a second, we already know that Freddy's an issue here. And it almost as if I don't know why or how it was introduced. Maybe the future movies do it, but the idea of this rhyme, it's probably the only thing that I would say, like, it didn't make sense for me at the beginning of the movie. Like, why do people already sing about this scary dude? But aside from that, it does its job. It does its job of adding to the general creepy ambiance.
He murdered 20 children
Yeah.
a generation ago. So it's the same as our kids singing Ring Around the Rosie, which would be pretty dark to people that lived through the plague. Like you're singing about all of your parents' generation falling down, dying. That came
Right.
out of the plague. So
Well, what I'm getting at is, if the little kids know it, then why don't the teens know it? And why are they confused about the name Fred Krueger on the hat if the kids know it? I'm not trying to pull this movie apart.
Right.
Understand? I'm just
Right.
saying that was one of those things I was like,
it's just Freddie. There were a lot of people in the 1980s named Freddie Mercury.
Exactly.
Right. There we go.
I think with the nursery rhyme, I think it's really just a extension of Jason Voorhees's.
Yes.
It's just one that, because of the dream setting and the themes of sleep, by making it a lullaby, and because Freddy was a child killer, I think it just adds to that sense of eeriness and almost grim fairy tale weirdness that the film brings. It's never, I've got to be honest, it's never bothered me that much. Yeah, the fact that the kids know it, but the adults don't. I think that's just more of the infection that Freddy Krueger is causing around the town, with all of these kids having the same dreams over and over again. I think it's something that the adults are trying to ignore, but it's something that the kids can't ignore because they're being faced with it every time they go back to sleep.
Well, I mean, and there's all types of other examples. Maybe think of Candyman, or you think of other ideas where there's some kind of urban legend. And I think if you went into this, if you didn't know what the legend of Fred Krueger, the child murderer, was, then maybe you might be hit with the same bit of dissonance that I was hit with. But in general, it is successful as adding to the eeriness, like you said. And I think there's a lot of things that I want to sort of talk about what adds to this movie for sure, but I'd like to do it in our superlative section. Are we ready, boys?
Ready?
Okay, so it is time to go over our movie superlatives. Dan, I'd like you to start with who your MVP of A Nightmare on Elm Street is.
I'm sorry to be predictable, but it's Robert Englund. I don't think Nightmare on Elm Street would be nearly as popular or as iconic if it weren't for Robert Englund. His performance in it is so good, and the fact that he is on AFI's list of heroes and villains, I think it just cements that this was a guy who was a character actor. Had dabbled in the horror genre with films like Eaten Alive by Tobe Hooper, and then was seen by Wes Craven to do this, and just catapulted him into superstardom. He's brilliant. It's easy to think of Freddy Krueger as a bit of a joker now due to the way that he was treated in the later sequels. But rewatching it again last night, I'd forgotten just how genuinely scary Freddy Krueger is. And because of that delight that he takes in the killing of his kids, they're so sadistic. He's so joyfully evil, and only Robert Englund, I think, could have brought that to the table. It has to be Robert Englund.
Portrayal of the character sometimes. Yeah, good choice. Chad, who's your MVP?
It's 2 for 2 here. We actually didn't spend much time talking about Robert Englund, and he goes into this audition. He's young, he is skinny, he's kind of got a curly afro going on for this audition. So he takes ash and he rubs it under his eyes, and he just stares at Wes Craven. And Wes Craven had an experience. He designs the Freddy character from a bunch of different things, from a bully that beat him up named Fred, so he immortalizes him in that respect, to this homeless drunk guy wearing a kind of a pork pie hat and staring at Wes in his bedroom. And so that had to conjure up memories for Wes of, here's this creepy dude staring at me. And Robert Englund just brings this secret sauce. It's this joy and life to this really, really sinister character. I love Robert Englund. I go out of my way to watch just about anything he's in, and he's not very choosy in some instances more, but he's always having a good time. He is such a joy.
Yes.
I will go. It is not 3 for 3. I'm going with who wrote the character, or I guess who brought the character available to be brought to life, which is Wes Craven. Regardless of how I would view the sequels, what we have here is something that is instantly memorable. There's a reason why it lands on our favorites list and why it is so long-lasting of a success. So I'm going with Wes Craven for my MVP. That's not taking anything away from Englund. I just think that the entirety of this movie and its sort of, I don't know, the feel I get from it, it's not just from our portrayal, it's just the writing of the character, and gosh, we just don't really know, and you can't get safe because you gotta sleep.
Wes is my 1B, so I don't think that's the wrong choice. 1B.
There was a brilliant tribute written by the critic Kim Newman, who's a very popular horror writer here in the UK. And when Wes Craven passed away in 2015, he wrote an amazing thing on Twitter. And it said, most horror filmmakers don't get to change the genre once in their lifetime. Wes Craven did it at least 3 times. And I think
that's great.
Wes Craven was absolutely brilliant. And I agree with you there. Actually, he might be tied with Robert Englund for MVP of Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah, high praise. Well, who is your best supporting actor, Dan?
I actually think the guy who plays Rod is actually really good.
Sue.
Say again, sorry.
It's the one I had trouble with earlier. Sue.
Well, you could go with. So this is an interesting story. He's credited as Nick Corey.
Nick Corey, yes.
Because we are not casting Latinos at this point in time. So his agent makes up an Italian name of Nick Corey. That is not his name, but it's so he could get the role as an Italian guy.
Wow.
So he's breaking some new ground. He's helping Latino actors everywhere.
Well, I do think it's a good choice. Go ahead, Dan.
Yes, sorry, because at first he just seems to be like the stereotypical jock that appears in every slasher movie. You think, I just can't wait for him to die. But once Tina dies, he becomes such a sympathetic character, and his acting is so good, particularly when he's talking with Heather Langenkamp between those jail bars, and he's saying, I never touched her. There was someone else in the room with us. He's so convincing. And I think it's a shame that he's killed off so early on in the film, really, because I think I think he gives a really, really good performance in that belies, in the hands of anyone else, that character could have been almost unbearable to be around, because the jock stereotype
Yeah.
was so overdone in the early '80s in the slasher movie.
Well, and it would have been doubled up if we hadn't cast Johnny Depp. That character
Mm.
was written to be a jock, and then they cast skinny little Johnny Depp,
Right.
who got the part because Wes Craven's daughter said, "Oh, he's so handsome, you have to pass."
You know, you could have just been handsome without being a sporto. And I thought they were going to go with that. You omit 2 lines, and he's just a handsome boyfriend. And
Right.
you don't need him to have a baseball bat or wear a football jersey to bed. Chad, who was your best supporting actor?
Mine was Amanda Wyss as Tina. She kind of has this Janet Leigh role where we have to believe at the start of the film that she is the main character. And when she is killed, she gets a heck of a send off.
Mhm.
And uh, Amanda just does this wonderful job of not showing that she is disoriented as all get out. She is screaming across all different thresholds of that bedroom. What a send off. Loved her part. And the first time I saw that, I was like, okay, here's our heroine. And we get that fake out of, nope,
Yeah.
nope, it's actually Heather.
Yeah. Well, and what's kind of neat about that with Nancy is that when they are all at the house before the before she's killed, uh, Nancy says something along the lines of like, "Hey, Glenn, we're here for her now, not for us." And I was flabbergasted that a 1984 movie would have a female character say something so selfless and something so caring about being a friend.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's something that, like, I don't know. It's not like I'm a therapist or anything, but when you hear a line like that, you know what? I believed her. Like, sorry, Johnny, we aren't doing the deed right now. We got to look out for our friend. I thought that was really something special.
It goes back to the sin aspect, though. She's
Yeah.
got to
Right.
remain this virginal
Got to be the
character.
virgin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it does make sense that because she does become our main protagonist, that she does have this a little extra depth than who we thought our main character might be. My best supporting is John Saxon, only
Yes.
because he's got just such a storied career. I
Yeah.
first saw him in Enter the Dragon, and boy, I would have loved to see our sheriff or our detective like really like, hey, if Freddy gets brought into the dream world, I'll show him a thing or two about Taekwondo, whatever it is. But I just it maybe, is it unfair, Chad? Is it unfair that I pick an adult character in a in a character full of teens?
Absolutely not.
You know how I roll. But no, I liked his character. I'm not taken away from the portrayals of the others, but I think he deserves a little bit of credit there.
Well, he's also in Dan's
In
favorite,
Black
Black
Christmas.
Christmas.
And he plays
There we go.
basically the same kind of role as well.
Yes, he's a lieutenant.
Yes.
Dan, what's your hidden gem from this movie?
There is a very, very brief moment where Tina and Nancy are talking after the tape has gone wrong and Johnny Depp's had to immediately turn it off. And he's snuck behind them. And there's a very brief shot where Tina is describing Freddy. And Johnny Depp just looks up at it's a very, very brief cut. And it's a moment of realization in Johnny Depp's eyes that this is happening to someone else other than me. It's a very subtle blink and you'll miss it moment.
Wow.
I think it's a very, very effective moment where you just see just how far the reach of this Freddy Krueger really is. It's a very, very brief moment, but it always stands out to me as
What a
particular
great choice.
moment of acting.
Johnny Depp's first acting gig, and yeah,
Oh, what a great choice. What about you, Chad? Your hidden gem.
I've talked about him before, but Jim Doyle, and
Mm.
I get double bonus here because it's him with Freddy's glove, and it's him with pressing his face against the wall. So he's actually in the movie as well as just making the movie magic with all these special effects.
Awesome. Yeah. Now, mine, I want you guys to help me out here. There's a sound that is either made by Freddy or surrounding Freddy when there's imminent danger. It's like a digital rattle. Sometimes they show his tongue. It does happen in the bathtub. It's kind of a quick clicking sound. Do you guys know what that sound is?
It's the knives rubbing together. It's
That's it. Okay.
Mhm.
I thought that sound, it was not overused. That's the thing I was worried about, is that, like, are you going to have this happen a lot? And when it's used, I think it's used to great effect. So just a little hidden sound like that I really liked. Especially since we know that it's not a rattlesnake, it's not his
Mhm.
actual tongue. Could they have gone cartoonish with it yet? No, I think they kept it nice and uh, not overused, is
Yeah.
what I'll say. Okay, here's a tough one, Dan. We have to recast somebody. Who in A Nightmare on Elm Street are you recasting?
I hate to say it, it has to be Heather Langenkamp for me. I think she's the weak element of the film. Um, Admittedly, I think she gets better through the course of the film, but I think at the beginning, I think she's the least convincing character. Um, in the later films where she returns in part 3 and part 7, I think she's actually really really good. But I think in the first film, I think it's clear that she isn't a established actress yet. Um,
Hmm.
Thing is, I don't know really who I would have recast instead of that role, but I really do like Amanda Weiss in the film. So I personally would have swapped Heather Langenkamp with Amanda Weiss and made Amanda Weiss the final girl and got rid of Heather
Not a bad
Langenkamp
choice.
originally. Um, I hate to say that because it's one of my favorite films, but yeah, for me, she has always been the weakest part of the film in my opinion.
And hey, we are forcing you to do this. It's not like you came in here guns a-blazing. Uh, Chad, who are you recasting?
Still reeling from that. I love Heather so much. I am going after Academy Award winner Ronee Blakley. And it's just, I want Dee Wallace. I love Dee Wallace in my horror films.
Oh
Put Dee
yeah,
Wallace in here.
she would have been great.
Chad, I went after Ronnie Blakely too.
Oh,
Ooh,
I think she incredibly overacts in this movie. And if I want to see someone at that age overact, I want it to be Goldie Hawn.
oh,
interesting.
She would have been
Overboard.
40 years old, and I think it
Okay.
would have worked.
All
Plus,
okay.
who says no to Goldie Hawn on screen? Okay.
right.
So, Dan, what is your best shot of the movie?
The spandex wall. The way that shot
Yeah.
is lit and the sound effect that's kind of like groaning noise that accompanies it, and the slow pan that the camera does, where you see just the full extent of the wall and how wide Freddy's reaching over Nancy. I think it's a brilliant shot. It's my favorite shot in the film, and I think it's one of the best shots in any 80s horror film.
I think it's pretty cool too because we aren't really introduced to the character yet.
Hmm.
And that does make me, I'm going to do a quick aside. We are shown in the opening credits, like the building of the glove. Do we need that, do you think?
I'm fine with it. I'm fine with the menace, but no, we don't need it.
No, we don't need it, but I do like it. I love the hissing of the boilers and the dripping of the water, and Freddy slowly cackling to himself.
Yeah.
Like I think this is clearly set before he's murdered, so this is maybe a
Yes.
much younger Freddy creating the implement that he will kill these 20 kids with. I think it's a cool little aside, but yeah, it's not needed. Just something to come over the
It,
credits, really.
I only bring it up because it's when stuff is being, like, when the push through the wall is happening,
Mm.
we haven't really been given our full reveal just yet. But I digress. What is your best shot, Chad?
The iconic shot of the glove between Nancy's legs in the bathroom. It's just, it is absolute perfection for
Mhm.
me. It still has the bit of 80s sex appeal. You've got Heather Langenkamp in the bathtub, but just the menace of the hand between her legs.
Chad, we're 2 for 2.
Mm.
I also am putting that as my top scene, and I almost said, like, do I need a disclaimer? Like, this is I'm doing it for the art here, not
Yes.
because of the subject.
I'm
Uh,
reading it for the articles, Mom.
I promise. I promise. Pay no mind that it's upside down. Okay. Well, yeah, that's my best shot as well. What is your best scene, Dan?
Tina's death. I think the build up to Tina's death,
God, yeah.
the moment when she first walks out of that patio door and goes outside calling who's there, I think that entire build up is brilliant, and I think it's really a precursor to how Wes Craven would go on to direct the intro to Scream with Drew Barrymore. It's that brilliant
Yeah.
idea of the cat chasing the mouse, toying with them, knowing exactly what they're going to do, and just keeping the tension on the knife edge. it's brilliant, and that shot where his face is peeled off is still very, very freaky to me. That entire sequence up to the moment where Johnny Depp and Heather Langenkamp burst into the bedroom to see Tina's just slaughtered. I think that entire 5-minute sequence is pure horror perfection.
It's very, very good. And it was a nominee for mine. Chad, what's your best scene?
I feel like I'm in church because I just want to say amen. But as bad as the doctor was, and we talked about the absolute nonsense coming out of his mouth, everything after he shuts up is great. So this sleep therapy scene with Nancy, where she just starts thrashing around, we don't see what's happening to her. And I like that, by the way. But when she wakes up, she has slashes on her arms, which we're concerned about, but we've kind of already seen. But then she says, I brought something back, and she pulls this hat. And that is a moment when you are first seeing this movie where you just say, whoa, okay, you can get hurt, but you can also pull things from your dream. And it kicks it up a notch for me.
Yep. A cool pivot. Yeah, I really liked that too. My best scene is a similar cat and mouse scene, but it's Freddy's chase of Nancy as she tries to figure out. She's getting brave about the situation and trying to figure out how to get in and get out with Glenn keeping watch, which he doesn't do a good job of. Lots of different world-bending things happening. Then I think that it is during that scene that we have another body bag, Tina, and we have the centipede coming out of the mouth. It ends with there's wrestling on the bed. She I'm not going to say inexplicably, but she grabs a pillow. The pillow gets ripped to shreds. So we've got all the feathers in the air. It's not comedic, but it is sort of visually attractive. Like, oh, look at all this stuff happening. I think just before is when like he busts through the door and the mirror. There's a whole lot going on there, and it batten downs the hatches with the cat and mouse stuff, and it just leans into Freddy being he's not just a killer, he's a terrorizer, and it is very much like cats are with what they leave on your front porches. And then she is saved by the bell. Indeed.
Yes.
Okay, so we've got a couple left here. Dan, what is your best wardrobe or makeup moment?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would probably go for the moment that I just alluded to, where Freddy's face peels off, because it's a really simple effect, but it's so bizarre and so gross. You know, it's so grotesque in how it's done, and the fact that he's still laughing while his face is being peeled off. It's a moment that has always stuck with me, even when I saw the film, you know, however many years ago it was for the first time. I love that moment. It's terrific.
Yes, that's Dustin's puppet moment, because that is a puppet that they just have a little string for his face.
Yeah, I like that too. What is your choice here, Chad?
It's got to be the razor claw for me. And part of the reason is just the hilarious stories. So they had several different iterations of the razor glove. They had one that was sharp, and that they had one that wasn't. And they kept losing track of which one was sharp and which one wasn't. Robert Englund pretty much immediately discovered as he's playing with it that he's stabbing himself. But he forgets, and he's going after casts too. And later on in the series, he actually winds up scarring some people, slashing at them. Nobody can keep track of, hey, does Robert have the razor knife one, or does he have a fake one? Just build a fake one, man. Until you're ready. But yeah, it's menacing, it's terrifying, and when he drags it along in the boiler room, man, the sound effects that go with it. It's still effective.
I agree. And special shout out to aftermarket Freddy Krueger gloves. Chad and I were talking a little bit about Halloween before we recorded, and I failed to mention that one of my best Halloween costumes when I was a young man was I did a great Edward Scissorhands, and the only way you can make Edward Scissorhands, you take a Freddy Krueger glove, because you've already got the blades on there, then you cut large foam core scissors to where you can then lightly move them around. It's already made for you. It's already there. $20 at your Spirit Halloween. I love the glove too. It's not getting my best here. My best is a little obscure. Well, not obscure, but it's not a focal point. I think more guys should wear bare midriff jerseys.
Right.
And
the Ezekiel Elliott look.
Yeah, the Ezekiel Elliott look. And guess what, fellas? You don't have to have six-pack abs to do it. There's a difference between basketball shorts and shorts that go above your knee, and there's a big difference of when your belly button is feeling that cool breeze and when it's not. And when you're down here in Texas like I am, then you've just had a record-setting summer. You need to sometimes expose the belly. So this is more of a real-world application that we all need to be more comfortable with our bodies and let it out.
Can I
Okay.
also give a quick shout out to the guy playing
Yes.
Rod for running full speed down a road in barefoot?
In bare feet. Yeah.
Yes.
Similar shout out to a former movie we did, Mel Gibson, Lethal Weapon. He's doing a lot of barefoot running, and that's tough. And you can tell it's hurting in the movie. They don't hide it; it's hurting. But yeah, that's a good shout out there. Okay, here's an important one, Dan. You have to change one thing about this movie. What are you going to change?
What would I change about A Nightmare on Elm Street, one of the most critically lauded horror films of all time?
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, I hate to say it again, but possibly the casting of Heather Langenkamp. Maybe focusing a bit more on the backstory of Freddy. I think the
Yes.
maybe seeing pre-burned Freddy Krueger doing his stuff might have been quite cool. But in all honesty, it's very difficult to know what to change about that film because it is pretty much, it's pretty much a masterpiece, really.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
like
Okay.
trying
Good
to say,
call.
what would you change about the Sistine Chapel? I'm not sure about the angle of his finger there. I'd make it slightly more
Too tall.
Exactly.
Ceiling should be bigger. Okay, so good option there. I actually always am in favor of lore and history, and that probably comes throughout the rest of the series. But the idea of we don't get too much of it here. I think it could be improved. Chad, what's your change one thing?
You mentioned an effect that doesn't hold up, so I'm going after the one that Jim Doyle hates the most, and I'm not a fan. There's a blow up doll in the end of the mom that gets sucked into the window. It's
Nice.
it's very brief, but it's very terrible. They were out of time, they were out of budget, and they needed this hook at the end. So this is what they did in an absolute pinch. Give them more time, give them more budget. It was shot in 32 days. So give them another 2 weeks, let Jim work his magic. He can probably come up with something that doesn't look so hokey. And I think we get a better ending out of it.
I'd like
God,
to change
you're
my
right.
answer. Yeah, old rubber
Yes,
legs
you're
going
right.
through the door. Yeah,
Yes.
it kills the ending of the film, to be honest.
Jim hates it
It
so
ends up
much.
ending on a laugh than a scare, which I think is fatal for a horror film.
You're right, and you almost expect there to be kind of a whoop kind of sound. Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. That's a good choice, Chad. Okay, so with my change one thing, I think I'm actually in favor of the dream theory or the dream understanding stuff. I just don't think it's best coming from Glenn unless Glenn is rewritten to be kind of a trippy, dreamy, hippie friend who's like that from the very beginning.
So you want Marty from Cabin in the Woods?
Thank you.
We're just about to
Yes.
say that.
Well, yeah. I think that if you can come to rely on an outer character or a peripheral character for some type of counsel or knowledge that isn't a fluke or something that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Did any of you guys, let's just say the first time you watched it, say, "Oh, I bet that kid knows all about Balinese dream fighting or whatever, whatever it was"? I like the idea that also that the kids maybe figure it out themselves, and if they can come to another teenager, like that's the outcast or that's the Ali Sheedy character, somebody who's like, oh, let's go and consult with this person. I think I might like that better, but then I might also be letting some of the more recency bias come in, the idea of like Stranger Things or the idea of like leave it up to the kids because kids plus adults is better. But that's where I'm just kind of torn here. But that's the direction I would be going to. I don't think there's too much that would be a larger change than that would be.
That's fair. I mean,
Yeah.
that's kind of how It Follows works. Is there are kids that they don't know the entirety of the rules, but they're figuring it out themselves. And you have one character that knows enough of, hey, it's not going to stop following you until you pass it on. He knows that much, but the
Right.
rules are still somewhat unclear, and they're figuring it out as the movie goes on. So yeah,
I
I'm
like that
fine with
idea.
it.
I think that for me the immediate issue that rises there is because of the time that the film was made and the genre that it's stuck in. If you wanted a character that would be like that, it would be very much the nerd stereotype,
Yeah.
which I think was pretty tired at that point. So I think Wes Craven does an interesting thing by making the boyfriend, the good-looking guy, also an intelligent guy, which didn't happen
Yeah.
very often in the slasher films of the
Good
80s.
point.
My concern when you say that was they introduce a mystical figure, and in the 80s it was probably a Native American. There'd be one
Yeah,
random Native American living on
yeah.
Elm Street. You go to this shaman type character, and he explains, oh, for my people, he is known as the dream demon,
Mhm.
and that's how this goes in the 80s. It's like, we don't need this treatment.
Yeah.
Let's live in a world where we believe that if Wes Craven did that, he would have been the only one that did it right.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
You pact on that he would
Definitely.
have done it. That wasn't Tatanka. He would not have.
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay, let's finish with this one here. Dan, what's your best quote?
I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy.
Ah, it's good.
Nice.
It's good.
Such a good line.
It is. I love it too. Chad, what's yours?
1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. The entire thing, though. I mean, I'm not going to sing all of it, but 3, 4, better lock the door. 5, 6, get your crucifix. 7, 8, gonna stay up late. 9, 10,
Never
never sleep
again.
again. It's so creepy when children sing. Children are creepy.
Yeah. Good choice there too. I'm going to break the rules a little bit. My best quote is a dialogue. It's a conversation. It is between Glenn and his mom. Miss Nude America is going to be on tonight. Well, how can you hear what she's going to say? Who cares what she says?
Right. And his mom is completely cool with it. She's just like,
Oh,
oh,
don't-
teenagers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. Well, we are going to rate our movie and we're going to say whether we recommend it. But before we do, Dan, is there anything in your world, in your life that you'd like to plug for our listeners?
Not really. I do write film reviews for every movie that I watch. So you can either follow me on Facebook at Dan Cook Movie Reviews, and I'm also on Letterboxd at Dan Cook 21. I used to run another website, but that's sort of fallen by the wayside. So that's mostly where I operate in terms of talking about films now. So yeah, you can follow me there if you like.
And if you're listening to a movie podcast, then you are definitely the type of person to read movie reviews. So let's get to our rating and recommendation. Dan, we use a 5-star system, so our rating is out of 5 stars. We do use half-star increments. So the lowest you can go is half a star, the highest is 5 stars. What do you rate A Nightmare on Elm Street?
4 stars out of 5.
A good rating. And I think we've talked about how this falls into our favorites, all of us, in a certain different kind of way, but that there are also things that we had mentioned are potential detractors, or I agree with Chad when he said Scream is a perfect movie, which is why Scream got 5 stars. Chad, what's your rating?
It's 5 stars. It is my favorite movie. For concept, execution, iconic villain, I love this movie so very much. I think it's the scariest concept of any horror movie I can think of. So for me, we've talked about the flaws. Doesn't erase the 5 stars for me. It is top of the list for me.
This isn't a favorite movie of mine, but it is a favorite concept. And when it came time to rate this, I was sometimes what I do is I have to start asking myself questions. Is that, well, okay, do I land on 4 stars? Well, is it as good as Coach Carter with Samuel L. Jackson? Yeah, it's better. Is it as good as Mandy Moore's A Walk to Remember? Yeah, it's better. And then I start thinking of my 5-star movies. I'm like, is it the perfect movie? I don't think so. So I think I'm gonna go in with 4.5, and I didn't expect to. I expected to rate this movie in the same generous term of this movie sets out to accomplish something, and it does. But I think it accomplishes more than that. And I think I'm very lucky to not be biased with the rest of the film series because I don't have as much experience with it. But by itself and what this thing starts with, if we don't end on a laugh, if we don't end with the sex doll going through the door and that particular car driving away, I think maybe this has the potential to have been a 5-star movie, and I see why it's some people's favorite. And a 95% critics meter. That's pretty high. But for me, this is 4.5 for its ranking. I don't know if 4.5 translates to being high on the list of our 2023 reviewed movies. I just think this movie deserves all the credit and praise it's ever gotten. Just maybe not quite the 5-star for me. So, and I certainly recommend it. Chad, can you help me pick a movie for next time?
Absolutely. So we are still in our spooky season. Each of these horror mystery movies involves a captive audience of strangers being put into terrifying situations. So option number 1, House of Nine from 2005. 9 strangers with no apparent connection between them are abducted, drugged, kidnapped, and sealed in a house together. Option 2 is Exam from 2009. 8 candidates for a highly desirable corporate job are locked together in an exam room, given a final test with just one seemingly simple question. However, it doesn't take long for confusion to ensue and tensions to unravel. Or option number 3, Cube from 1997, Canada's finest. 6 complete strangers with widely varying personalities are involuntarily placed in an endless maze containing deadly traps.
If I were looking at the years alone, I think I would have to go with the earliest example of this kind of trope, I guess we'll say. And I can't say no to, God, what do you say, Canada's finest? We got to
Yes,
do Cube next week.
yes. We are we are on low budget. Nightmare on Elm Street you don't think of as low budget, but we will continue our low budget horror movies.
I love it. I love it. Well, Dan, thank you for joining.
Oh, it's
Yes.
been wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
The movie's great. Talking about the movie sometimes even better. And thank you, Chad. And thank you, all the lords, ladies, and knights of the Retro Movie Roundtable. We invite you to reach out to us. We want to hear from you. Subscribe, rate, and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts. You better delete that Stitcher because it's gonzo, Pandora, or wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Give us a like on Facebook, Instagram, and follow us on Twitter at movie_retro. Email us at retromovieroundtable@yahoo.com. Hey, producing and providing this podcast is fun, but not free. We invite you to support the show at our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/retromovieroundtable. Any contribution is much appreciated and will go towards making the show better for you, the listeners. As always, thank you for listening. Be good to each other and watch more movies. Chad?
Jason, my special, special boy, do you know what your gift is? No matter what they do to you, you cannot die. You can never die. You've been sleeping, honey, but now the time has come to wake up. Mommy has something she wants you to do.